I take it that you don't have a problem of trolls in the UK.
Well, we do.
We have a huge problem with
I think
trolls.
it is a problem, and I think, you know, BBC being a prominent national broadcaster in the UK, I've, you know, as you kindly said at the start, I've worked quite extensively on our kind of flagship news programs, and I'm astonished and horrified at the levels of abuse that people who actually just broadcast on the BBC. I'm a backroom guy. I very rarely speak publicly, and I like it that way, not least because I think our on-air personalities, I'm sure you have experience of this, just eye-watering levels of personal abuse of the worst kind, particularly for women broadcasters. And I think there's a real issue here about why would you choose to go into a national media space as an ambitious and capable woman broadcaster in the current climate, because what you're being exposed to, particularly around sort of threats of gender violence and so on, is just completely unacceptable. And I think that's a big problem for our industry that we need to confront.
And then you have the big real-life troll who sits in the White House. How do you deal with him?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because you make an interesting point there that we've got an obligation to be impartial and accurate about the Trump presidency, just as we do for any other story. And I think this is an issue for all media everywhere, particularly in the US, where you've now got this extraordinary situation where, you know, the New York Times is almost the official opposition to Donald Trump. And actually, that's not a comfortable place for national media organizations to get into. And the BBC's fought very carefully to avoid, you know, to avoid having our impartiality compromised around President Trump. And I think actually, weirdly, that's given us a benefit in the US, where we're seen as a kind of independent arbiter and a rather calmer space for debating US political issues. And I think the same is true in India. The BBC's verifiable independence and its independence from influence of any kind within India, clearly operating within Indian law and other guidelines, but, you know, we have editorial independence. That is a good place for us to be in India, because it means that people will come to us for that independent view, whether it's around reality check or vaccination, the Kerala floods, other disputed stories. The BBC's independent view counts for something in this market.
Is it possible to be distant and objective if you were to have a Trump-like figure in 10 Downing? I'm not praying that that happens, but...
To be fair to colleagues in the US media, I think that is one of the issues they're struggling with, that they clearly viscerally feel, particularly if you look at these issues around President Trump effectively inciting threats against the media in general terms, as they see it. They feel that that is something they can't remain silent about. And I have sympathy with that, because obviously, you know, people often say to me, well, of course there are things that the BBC is not impartial about. What are you not impartial about? And I think one of the things that we're not impartial about is, people making threats to journalists or carrying out violent action against journalists. And, you know, we've sometimes been involved in campaigns on behalf of our own staff. And so, for example, currently we certainly support Reuters and their campaign around their photojournalists imprisoned in Myanmar. You know, these are things we care about, and we care about the situation in the US. But I think it's for those US media houses have to form their own view about how they continue to advocate for their own independence and safety while remaining trusted and impartial in the market.